poor single dad took in a runaway girl for one night, unaware her father was a powerful millionaire. Snow whipped against the garage like shards of glass, piling high in drifts, swallowing the road and muting the world. Inside, Elias worked over an engine, his hands black with grease, his muscles tight from hours of wrestling with metal that refused to obey. Finn sat at a small crate-turned desk, pencil flying across the page, sketching machines that might never exist. His small shoulders shook occasionally, not from cold, but from some quiet tension, some weight he carried without words. A sudden pounding shattered the hum of the heater and the scrape of the pencil against paper. Hard, urgent, metallic. Elias froze, wrench in hand. No one came here at night, not in a storm like this. "Who's there?" His voice was low, rough from long days and longer nights. "Please, I'm stuck. My car, I crashed. Can you help?" The voice was small, frightened, raw. Elias's gut tightened. He moved toward the small door and the larger garage door, heart thudding. A twist of the latch, a push. Cold hit him like a fist. She was there. A girl barely 19, coat stiff with frost, hair tangled, cheeks streaked with frozen tears. Behind her, a silver sports car lay crumpled in the ditch, headlights dim, lost in the storm. Elias's first thought, trouble. Expensive car, rich family, lawsuits waiting. Then he saw her eyes, wide, terrified, and something in him didn't care about any of that. "Come in," he said softly, "before you freeze." She stepped inside, shivering, boots dripping snow onto the floor. Finn peeked behind his desk, eyes wide, heart full of wonder. The storm screamed outside. The heater hummed. The garage felt smaller, warmer, alive. "Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from tonight? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing where everyone is watching from." The girl shivered by the heater, snow melting slowly from her coat, tiny droplets clinging stubbornly to the hem of the blanket Elias draped over her shoulders. Every breath she exhaled came out in small clouds, mixing with the faint warmth of the room. Finn edged closer, sketchbook in hand, curiosity and awe lighting up his small face. He watched her, hesitant but fascinated, as if trying to measure whether she was real or part of the storm itself. "This is my place," Elias said, quietly, his voice steady and calm, carrying more weight than the words suggested. "Not much, but you'll be safe here tonight." He didn't smile, didn't gesture grandly. He simply spoke. The calm certainty in his tone wrapped around them like another layer of warmth. The garage smelled of oil and metal, sharp and familiar, a mix of sweat, hard work, and long nights that stretched endlessly. Every surface told its own story. Cracked, worn floors that had felt the weight of engines too heavy for their age. Shelves piled high with tools, haphazard stacks of blueprints curling at the edges, yellowed with time and stained with smudges. There was life here, quiet, stubborn, imperfect, and somehow steady. Finn finally spoke, voice shy but eager, barely above the hum of the heater. "Do you want to see my drawings?" The girl nodded. Her green eyes flicked nervously from the sketches to Finn's earnest, small face, then to Elias's large hands, black with grease, hands that had seen hard work and long nights. She whispered, almost to herself, "These are amazing." Finn's eyes lit up, cheeks pink with pride. He leaned closer to his own work, pointing at a detailed sketch of a car with engines that seemed alive, each line pulsing with energy, almost as if it could leap off the page. "One day, I'll build something that never breaks," he said, firm and full of hope, as if saying it out loud made it real. The girl laughed softly, incredulous, tiny and musical, her fear and tension melting away for the first time since the storm. "I think you already could," she said, eyes wide with genuine admiration, her voice carrying the slightest hint of wonder. Outside, the blizzard raged, furious and endless, pounding against the garage doors, scraping against the windows like it had a mind of its own. But inside, the garage felt like a small, contained world, alive with warmth and movement. The heater hummed steadily, pencils scratched across paper, snow dripped from boots onto the concrete floor in irregular splashes, and in that quiet chaos, a fragile, fleeting kind of magic hung in the air. Elias moved around the garage with careful purpose, checking the girl's car at a distance, muttering under his breath about bent axles, broken brake lines, and the little mechanical failures that seemed to follow life's rhythm. Every motion was deliberate, hands steady despite the fatigue etched into his shoulders. The girl watched him quietly, still shivering, still taking shallow breaths from the storm outside, and yet slowly beginning to sink into the warmth of the garage. Finn leaned against the edge of the desk, tracing his fingers over the rough edge of a blueprint as if he could feel the future in the paper itself. "You'll be okay," he said, softly, almost to himself, his small voice carrying conviction that belied his age. The storm didn't care. Outside it roared, wild, unfeeling, cutting through the darkness with ice and wind. But in the tiny garage, surrounded by oil, sketches, and the steady hum of the heater, 3 lives had collided, tangled by snow, by chance, by a knock in the night. A girl running from fear, a boy dreaming beyond his years, and a man who had carried too many nights on his shoulders, all held together, briefly, in this fragile, warming bubble of quiet struggle and human connection. And no one yet knew how far that collision would reach, what ripple it would send into the lives of these 3 souls, or how a single stormy night would begin to change everything. The wind rattled the garage doors like a wild animal pounding on the walls from the inside. Snow scraped against the windows in long, icy sheets, scraping, tapping, as if trying to claw its way into the small world within. Inside, the heater hummed steadily, a soft, warm pulse in the otherwise chaotic night. Its orange glow cut across the dark corners of the garage, softening the shadows and offering a fragile sense of comfort against the storm's relentless roar. Cora crouched near it, knees pulled tightly to her chest, shivering despite the thin blanket Elias had handed her. Her coat, soaked through with snow and slush, clung to her like frozen metal. Every breath she took came out in small, visible clouds, the warmth of the room barely reaching her. Elias placed a mug of steaming cocoa in front of her, its rich, sweet smell heavy against the sharp tang of oil and grease that lingered in the air. "Drink," he said, low and steady, his voice calm enough to anchor her trembling hands. It wasn't loud, wasn't commanding, just steady, solid, safe. Cora's small hands wrapped around the mug. She sipped slowly, tiny fingers gripping the warm ceramic, teeth chattering once, twice. Then finally, she looked up, wide-eyed, cheeks pink from the cold and relief. "Thank you," she whispered, almost fragile in her exhaustion. Finn edged closer, curiosity and excitement sparking behind his wide eyes. "Do you want to see my drawings?" he asked, voice quiet but eager. "I've been working on a car. It never breaks." Cora tilted her head, leaning slightly toward him, her fingers brushing the edge of the sketchbook. "Show me," she said softly, voice small, but filled with something like awe. Finn's pencil flew across the page. Gears, pistons, impossible engines that seemed alive with motion, wheels spun even on blank pages, and little contraptions balanced on invisible threads. Cora's eyes followed every line, her mouth slightly open, mesmerized. You
"See it," she said, voice small but sharp with awe. "Most people, they don't even notice." Elias stood back a few steps, arms crossed, watching quietly, his shoulders relaxed for once, hands tucked under grease-streaked arms, eyes moving slowly between his son and the girl that had appeared out of the storm. The heater hummed steadily, snow rattled against the walls, and the room felt suspended in time. Finn sketched furiously, lost in his own little universe, while Cora leaned closer, utterly absorbed in the impossible worlds his pencil created. Finally, after a long pause, Cora spoke again, almost to herself, voice barely above the soft hum of the heater. "Cora," she whispered, correcting herself. I ran. I didn't know where else to go." Elias nodded once, slowly, the gesture deliberate, quiet, steady. "You're safe here tonight." And there was no hesitation in his voice. The words were simple, yet they carried more weight than any loud declaration could. Finn's eyes grew wide, filled with earnest determination. "We can keep you warm," he said, voice serious like a small promise. We'll take care of you." Cora clutched the mug tighter, letting its warmth seep through her fingers up into her chest. Outside, the storm beat against the walls, snow slamming into the windows in heavy, relentless sheets. Inside, the garage felt small, alive, almost breathing. The warmth of the heater mingled with the faint aroma of cocoa, grease, and snow. The soft scratch of Finn's pencil added rhythm to the quiet, punctuated occasionally by the tiny exhale of breath from someone finally able to relax. Hours passed slowly, stretched long in the shelter of the garage. Cora leaned back on the couch, eyes tracing the patterns the snow made as it piled against the windows, small swirls caught in the dim lamp. Finn had dozed off, sketchbook clutched to his chest, pencil still tucked between his fingers, dreams of engines spinning in his mind. Elias stood in the corner, tools long forgotten, hands resting on his knees, eyes flicking from the storm outside to the small figure huddled near the heater. The night stretched on, heavy with quiet. Outside, the blizzard raged, merciless and untamed, white and ruthless. But inside, there was life. A girl, a boy, and a man who had known too many long nights sat together in a cocoon of warmth, their own small world held safe from the fury beyond. The silence was punctuated only by occasional sips of cocoa, the scratch of a pencil across paper, and the slow, steady breathing of someone finally allowed to relax. Time seemed to blur. Minutes became hours, and the storm's roar became a distant drumbeat, a reminder of the chaos outside. But inside, in the glow of the heater, the warmth of shared space, and the soft shadows dancing across walls, something fragile and extraordinary was taking place. The world beyond the garage was white, ruthless, unfeeling, but inside it was warmer, quieter, safer. Inside, for a few precious hours, a runaway girl, a boy with big dreams, and a man who had known too many long nights found a small, fragile moment of peace, a pause against the storm, a pause against life itself. And outside, the blizzard continued, relentless, wild, patient. But for those three, above the hum of the heater and the soft scratch of pencil on paper, the storm could wait.
The storm had not let up. Snow pounded relentlessly against the windows, tapping, scratching, like tiny fingers desperate to be noticed. The wind rattled the old roof, whistling through the cracks and curling around the edges of the garage as if it had a life of its own, twisting and swirling like a living thing. But above the workshop, the little apartment glowed warmly, a small island of light and life in the white, wild world outside. Cora sat curled on the couch, knees drawn to her chest, the blanket pulled tightly around her shoulders. Her coat lay damp and crumpled on the floor, snow still clinging stubbornly to the edges. Her hair, damp from the storm, clung to her cheeks, and she brushed it back absently, her eyes wide, almost unblinking, as they followed the flickering light from the heater. Shadows danced along the walls in strange patterns, swaying with the warm orange glow, stretching and shrinking like tiny phantoms playing across the room. Finn lay nearby on the floor, sketchbook open beside him. His pencil moved with careful precision, slow strokes filling the page with gears, engines, and cars that seemed impossible. Each line felt deliberate, purposeful, as though he were sketching not just machines, but the world he wished to build. Every so often, he glanced up at Cora, his eyes a mixture of pride, curiosity, and something shy, a quiet hope that she might see the world he imagined. Elias sat in the corner, elbows resting on his knees, eyes flicking between his son and the girl who had appeared out of the storm. His hands, streaked with grease, rested heavily on his knees. He didn't move, he only watched. Watched Finn with a father's tired pride. Watched Cora with quiet wonder. The room felt still, almost suspended in time, save for the occasional hiss of the heater and the relentless wind outside. "Your drawings?" Cora's voice broke the quiet, soft, hesitant, filled with awe. "They're amazing."
Finn's eyes lit up, a small grin breaking over his face, cheeks flushing. "Thanks. I want to build a car that never breaks, so Dad doesn't have to work so late," he said, voice earnest. Cora turned her gaze to Elias, tracing the lines of his hands, the way his fingers curled around the grease-stained tools, the quiet strength in his shoulders, the tired patience etched in every movement. "He's learning from you," she said softly, almost to herself. Elias shook his head, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "He's already smarter than I'll ever be," he murmured, voice low, filled with a mixture of pride and quiet sadness, the kind that comes from knowing the weight of the world too well. The heater hummed steadily, a gentle, almost musical background to the storm outside. Snow slapped and scraped against the windows in chaotic rhythms, but inside, for a moment, the chaos felt far away. Cora lifted the mug of cocoa Elias had made, letting the warm liquid seep through her fingers, spread slowly into her chest, into her tired bones. She exhaled, a soft breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, and leaned back against the couch. For the first time in hours, maybe days, she allowed herself to feel small, to feel safe, to feel like she didn't have to hold everything inside all at once. Finn yawned, curling into a blanket like a small, contented animal. Elias watched him for a long moment, memorizing the quiet serenity of his son's face. Then he leaned back himself, shoulders loosening, listening to the storm as it raged and moaned outside. The apartment was quiet, except for the soft, scratching rhythm of Finn's pencil as he finished one last line, one last curve, before sleep finally took him. Cora shifted on the couch, eyes heavy, tracing the patterns the shadows made on the walls. She sipped the cocoa again, slowly, letting the warmth settle in her chest. She watched the snow pile higher against the windows, watched the dim lamplight flicker in the corners of the room, casting everything in gentle gold and shadow. Slowly, almost reluctantly, her eyelids fell shut, and she let the comfort of the room wrap her in its quiet embrace. The storm outside raged on, relentless and untamed, snow draping the garage in thick white layers, wind cutting across the world like invisible blades. But above the garage, inside the tiny apartment, 3 figures slept or rested, together, quietly, tangled in the shared warmth of a single night. A night that began in fear and uncertainty had blossomed into something softer, something fragile, something unforgettable. The wind howled, the snow fell, the storm endured, wild, patient, endless, and yet inside, above the garage, for a few precious hours, there was stillness, warmth, and a strange, quiet kind of magic. Morning arrived quietly, sunlight spilling over the snow, like a pale, trembling promise. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside white, still, and almost unreal. Streets were empty, sidewalks buried under a thick, sparkling blanket. Icicles hung from the roof, long and jagged, catching the early light and scattering it across the garage floor in tiny golden shards. The wind had calmed, but the air still carried the crisp, clean scent of snow, a faint whisper of the blizzard that had roared through only hours ago. Cora stirred on the couch, wrapping the blanket tighter around her shoulders as though trying to hold on to the warmth of the room. Her hair was damp, sticking lightly to her cheeks, and her eyelashes glistened from melted snow. Her eyes blinked slowly, adjusting to the soft morning light streaming through the frosted windows. Finn, on the other hand, had already been awake for a while. He sat cross-legged on the floor, pencil in hand, completely absorbed in his own little world, sketching gears and engines with painstaking care. Every stroke of the pencil seemed deliberate, as if he were drawing not just machines, but dreams, the kind of dreams that could fix broken nights. Elias moved to the window, brushing frost from the glass with the back of his hand. Outside, the sports car lay in the shallow ditch at the end of the lane, angled awkwardly, half buried in snow. It looked fragile, vulnerable, as if waiting silently for rescue. The tracks of the night before were faint now, fading into the soft, pristine blanket of white, leaving the world looking untouched, calm, almost impossible to believe had just been torn apart by a storm. Cora pushed herself upright, slowly, stretching as though she were shaking off the last remnants of fear from her body. She shook out her damp hair and looked around the apartment, eyes sweeping over every detail. The worn couch, the tiny kitchenette with its chipped paint and scuffed countertops, Finn's scattered drawings on the floor, and the lingering, comforting smell of cocoa mixed with the faint scent of engine oil. Every small, imperfect detail felt real, solid, grounding her in the space where she had found safety. "Thank you," she said softly, voice steady but carrying a tremor beneath it, as if her relief and lingering fear were intertwined. Elias nodded, his hands resting on the edge of the workbench. There was a quiet gravity in his gaze, a recognition of the unspoken bond that had formed overnight. "Tow truck will be here soon," he said, his voice calm, almost routine. "Roads are clear now. You won't be stuck for long." Finn looked up at Cora, his eyes wide, shimmering with a mixture of hope and innocence. "You don't have to go back alone," he said, clutching his sketchbook tightly to his chest. "I mean, you could stay." His voice wavered slightly, unsure, as if daring to dream that she might. Cora shook her head, offering a small, wistful smile. Her lips curved faintly, but her eyes carried the weight of everything she still had to face. "I can't," she said softly. I have to face what comes next." Just then, the crunch of tires on snow announced the tow truck's arrival. The sound cut through the quiet morning like a signal, snapping the moment into motion. Elias and Cora stepped outside, the cold biting sharply at their faces, wind whipping around them, ruffling coats and hair. Finn watched from the doorway, jacket pulled tight, heart racing as he tried to take it all in. The driver climbed down from the truck, muttering under his breath about frozen axles and bent control arms. Chains clinked and metal groaned as he prepared the car. Elias glanced at Cora, taking in the soft waves of her hair, the steady determination in her stance, the faint shadow of worry still lingering in her expression. Cora pressed a folded piece of paper into his hand. "This is my number," she said, voice low but deliberate, carrying a quiet intensity. "If you ever need anything, really anything." Elias hesitated, glancing down at the paper and then at her face. There was a pause, a moment suspended in the cold morning air, before he finally nodded and tucked it carefully into his pocket. "All right," he said. Chains rattled, the tow truck's engine hummed, metal groaned, and the car was lifted carefully onto the flatbed. Snow swirled around their feet, catching the sunlight in tiny, sparkling vortices, almost like the remnants of the storm were dancing around them. Cora turned to Elias one last time, her voice soft but strong, carrying over the crunch of snow beneath their feet. "You gave me more than shelter. You gave me a place to breathe when everything else was falling apart." Elias swallowed hard, nodding, his throat tight. "Be careful," he said, voice low. The flatbed rolled forward, carrying her car slowly toward the main road. Finn waved, small but determined, his figure framed against the sparkling snow. Elias watched the fading tracks in the snow, remembering the fear, the storm, the strange night that had begun with a simple knock at the garage door. When the truck finally disappeared into the whiteness, Elias turned back toward the garage. Finn followed him inside, coat still drawn tight, cheeks flushed from the cold. The sketches remained scattered across the floor, the heater still humming quietly, the faint scent of cocoa lingering in the air, like a memory. The blizzard was gone. Outside, the world was still. Inside, the garage held warmth, quiet, and the fragile, hopeful sense that something unexpected, something new, had begun. 2 quiet weeks slipped by after the storm. The snow had melted into thin rivers along the streets, leaving the edges of the garage wet and shining. The morning light spilled through the dusty windows, soft and gold, touching the scattered tools like it was trying to warm them awake. Inside, the little world of the garage breathed slowly. Finn sat hunched at his small desk, tongue peeking from the corner of his mouth as he sketched engines with fierce concentration. The scratch of his pencil was the only sound, besides the steady hum of the heater. Elias stood near the counter, sorting through a stack of overdue bills. His thumb dragged across numbers he didn't want to read. The garage smelled of old oil, burnt metal, and the faint sweetness of the cocoa Finn had made earlier. And then, ding! The front door's bell sliced through the quiet. Finn froze. His pencil hovered over the page. Elias's heart gave a sharp, startled kick. No customer came this early. Elias wiped his hands on a rag, took a breath, and stepped toward the door. When he opened it, the world seemed to shift. A tall man stood before him, broad shoulders, long dark coat, gloves that looked untouched by anything ordinary. Power sat on him like it belonged there. Behind him, Cora. She stood straight, chin lifted slightly, eyes steady but nervous. The man's gaze swept slowly across the garage, the cracked floor, the hanging tools, Finn's sketches pinned crookedly to the wall. His eyes were sharp, trained, thoughtful. Finally, he spoke. "Mr. Evans," he said, voice deep enough to settle into the room. "I am Julian Thorne." Elias's breath stalled. The name meant nothing to him, yet the man carried it like a crown. Cora stepped forward, instinctively placing herself just slightly in front of her father, her presence softer, warmer. Julian's eyes, cold at first, shifted. A hint of something human, worry, gratitude, pushed through the surface. "My daughter," he said quietly, "told me everything." Elias felt the room tilt. He expected anger, accusal, a demand. Instead, Julian continued, voice lowering. "She told me a man she had never met opened his door during the worst storm of the year. He gave her warmth, safety, a chance to breathe." His eyes flickered around again. "This place is humble, but it tells me something. It tells me you didn't do it for anything, not even thanks." Cora's voice slipped in, gentle but steady. "He didn't just fix my car, Dad. He looked out for me. He helped me when he didn't have to." Finn peeked out from behind the desk, curiosity glowing in his eyes. Julian noticed him, and something softened in the man's stern face. A boy with a mind for machines, and a father who understands them not from books, but from life. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a sleek black portfolio. He held it like it contained something fragile, something important. Ethelgard Motors is expanding, creating a testing and prototype branch. Not the engineering team, that requires degrees and paperwork. His eyes lifted to Elias. But we need a master of real-world machines. Someone who can feel when a motor breathes wrong. Someone whose hands know what textbooks miss. Elias stared, stunned. Cora's eyes shone with a mix of pride and nervous hope. Julian stepped closer, voice a notch softer. "I'm not here because I'm a businessman. I'm here because my daughter showed me something I haven't seen in years." His jaw tightened. Decency. The garage seemed to shrink around them, the heater humming softly, Finn tapping his pencil nervously, and the winter sunlight warming the dust in the air. Elias didn't say a word. He couldn't. His world, simple, small, heavy with struggle, suddenly felt suspended between past and possibility. The quiet life he'd known trembled on the edge of something bigger, something dangerous, something bright, something real. Elias's fingers tightened on the workbench, the wood biting into his palms. The sleek portfolio Julian held seemed to glow, like it had pulled all the light in the room towards itself. Julian laid it gently on the table. "This isn't a job offer for an engineer," he said slowly, reading the tension in Elias's shoulders. "I know your background, I know your life, and I respect it." He opened the portfolio. Inside were sketches, concepts, early designs, not polished, not complicated, raw ideas, the bones of future machines. "We're forming a prototype testing division, real machines, real engines, and we need someone who understands how engines behave after 10 winters, after a bad road, after a mistake." He met Elias's eyes. "This is a paid consultation role, hands-on, practical. You'll work with designers, mechanics, and engineers who will learn from you, not the other way around." A pause. "A salary stable enough to lift the weight off your shoulders, and a school near the facility that can give Finn opportunities he deserves." Elias's throat went dry. He thought of the bills on the counter, the cracked apartment upstairs, the winters that tightened around them every year. Finn's drawings, dreams too big for the small world they lived in. Cora stepped beside him, close enough to share her warmth. "You gave me a place to stay," she said softly. "Not because you expected anything, but because that's who you are." Her voice wavered, barely. "Let us return a piece of what you gave." Elias stared at the sketches again. engines he could imagine touching, machines he could breathe life into, work that felt honest, real, work he could be proud of without pretending to be someone else. He exhaled slowly, the breath trembling. Finn looked up at him, eyes shining with that small, fragile hope only children possess. Elias's answer came like a whisper, breaking free from years of weight. "All right." Cora closed the portfolio gently, as though sealing a promise inside it. Cora let out a tiny breath of relief. Finn's face lit up like a bulb turning on after a long blackout. Outside, sunlight dripped through the melting snow, dazzling and clean. Inside the garage, surrounded by oil stains and scattered sketches, something shifted, something deep. The blizzard was gone, but the life it had blown into their world was only just beginning.
A year had passed. A whole year since the night's snow hammered against the old garage and a frightened girl had stumbled into their world. The blizzards were long gone now. The city breathed differently. Brighter streets, clearer skies, mornings filled with light instead of worry. And somewhere in that city, high above the noise and traffic, stood a glass and steel building that sparkled under the sun. Inside it, a lab, unlike anything Elias had ever seen. The new workshop stretched wide and open, polished floors reflecting the soft glow of overhead lights. Machines hummed in gentle rhythm, their metal frames shining like they were proud to be alive. Every corner buzzed with the promise of invention, sleek tables, sturdy tool racks, computers blinking quietly, and warm cups of untouched coffee cooling beside half-finished blueprints. Elias stood at the center of it all. He bent over a small prototype engine, its silver surface catching the light as it pulsed with a soft, steady vibration. His hands, once used to cold wrenches and oil-stained parts, now moved with careful precision, guided by confidence instead of exhaustion. A slow smile tugged at his lips. For the first time in years, maybe ever, he felt something whole settle inside his chest, something like peace. Across the room, Finn sat at a wide desk of clean steel and bright lamps. His sketchbook lay open beside a tablet, both crowded with drawings, gears, engines, ideas that stretched beyond his age. He leaned forward, brows furrowed, pencil dancing across the page. Every so often, he glanced up at his father. The pride that passed between them wasn't loud or showy, just warm, quiet, steady, like a thread only the two of them could see. Cora stood near one of the tall windows, sunlight spilling across her hair. She held a notebook full of calculations, numbers running down the page like tiny rivers. She traced them with her finger, whispering ideas under her breath, her green eyes bright with that same spark, the one that had shown itself the night she studied Finn's drawings for the first time. She wasn't the scared girl from the blizzard anymore. She stood taller now, breathing easier, dressed in colors that matched her energy. Curiosity danced in her eyes, soft and bold all at once. Julian Thorne, once the crisp, intimidating millionaire, walked among them with sleeves rolled up, tie forgotten, eyes filled with honest awe. He moved slowly, like a man who still couldn't believe what this team had built in a single year. He paused near Finn's desk, gently lifting one of his boy's sketches. A quiet whistle escaped him. Elias switched off the engine and stepped back. The soft whir died down, leaving only the gentle hum of the lab and the rustle of turning pages. He let his eyes travel slowly around the room. Finn sketching with a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Cora biting her lip as she scribbled down a new idea. Julian nodding in admiration,
whispering something about brilliance and potential. Elias felt something warm spread through him, slowly, quietly, deeply. This life, this room, these people, it was all born from a single night he could never forget. Mounted above Finn's new workstation hung one of his old drawings. The small garage at the end of the snowy lane, the night sky swirling in white, and a single glowing window. Warm, patient, waiting. Elias stared at it for a long moment. Something like gratitude washed over him. Gentle, steady, almost overwhelming. That night, that light, that choice to open the door, it had changed everything. Outside, the city shone bright. Inside, engines hummed, pencils danced, soft laughter drifted through the air like a familiar melody. The storm was long gone now, but the life that night had sparked was still growing, stronger every day. Elias watched Finn carefully connect tiny gears on a model engine. Cora leaned close, whispering quiet calculations, her excitement bubbling into a smile. Julian knelt beside them, curious as ever, his face open with wonder. Everything had changed. Everything had grown. And for the first time, truly, Elias felt this was home. Not the garage, not the tools, but these people, this team, this family. And it felt right. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more warm and heartfelt tales like this, don't forget to subscribe to Heartfelt Tales TV. Your support helps us bring more beautiful stories to life.